Today we're going to be taking a look at now, or how and why now is the time to really start making well-being a business priority. So my name is Mark and I head up the customer success team at People Matter. My background over the last few years has been both in technology, when I set up my own tech company around the learning development space, and kind of more recently, I've been focusing on what we class as sort of people analytics and what drives sort of high-performing cultures, high-performing learning cultures as well. And really that's been sort of focusing around large enterprises and how we drive behavioural change, which is really important when we're looking to create the right cultures that we want to develop across the organisations that we work with as well. So just a quick brief intro into People Matter. We combine the latest psychological research with cutting edge technology, and we develop what we call intelligent mental wellness tools. These have been designed to support both and the business to really sort of build resilience and to start to beat burnout, which is a massive issue that organisations are grappling with, not just in the UK, but around the world at the moment. And this is all powered by data and insight. The reason I wanted to join this business, and it's a startup business, and the reason I kind of sort of fell in love with it was that I actually experienced burnout myself, which led to quite a severe time of depression, sort of shortly after I'd set up the tech company. Basically I reached burnout and everything sort of fell apart around me, and I decided that the next organisation that I wanted to work in needed to have a deep purpose, but also I felt really passionately about this subject, and being able to support people and individuals to really prevent them from experiencing what I've gone through in my life. And I definitely believe that, you know, all the investment that's gone into People Matter so far, if that stops one person from feeling how I felt and what I went through, then that's got to be worth it. So yeah, so I'm delighted to be a part of this organisation. Before I go into the presentation, just to say that if you do have any questions, please put them into the chat. Ben and I are going to try and either get to them either as we go through the presentation, or we'll try and come to them sort of at the end and try and get through as many as we can. So I'm going to start with quite a simple question, which is, how are you? To sort of stop just for a few seconds and just reflect on that question of how are you. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, how are you really feeling? Two quite similar questions, but provide sort of different insight into anybody. So I think it's a question, the first question in particular is something that we always ask everybody. You know, we're all jumping onto Zoom calls or onto our Google Hangouts, and the response to the first question of how are you is usually something like, I'm fine, thanks, which is okay. The response to the second question is usually somewhat different, especially given sort of the current situation that we find ourselves in during 2020, which is unusual and weird for everybody. But I want people to really start thinking about how they're actually feeling today. And, you know, how often have you asked the people that you care about how they're feeling? And how often have you asked your colleagues, your team, and the other people that you work with as well? And the reason I sort of set this sort of question up is because our feelings and emotions play and drive a huge part of how we feel about our overall well-being, and how we manage ourselves as well. I want to talk about mental health in a little bit. You know, the phrase sort of mental health is something we hear more today than what we've ever done before. And I think particularly during this pandemic in particular, there's more and more of a focus on this as well. It's important, I think there was starting to get momentum and build up prior to the COVID situation. But I also think that, the COVID situation has definitely highlighted it. But it's like, what do we exactly sort of refer to when we talk about mental health? Well, it refers to people's cognitive, behavioural and emotional well-being. So it's really about how people think, feel and behave on a daily basis. So when we talk about mental health, and there is always a reluctance to talk about mental health, and we're much more likely to talk about our physical health, and everyone seems to be quite focused and quite happy on talking about their physical health, and what they're up to, how they're keeping fit, what's the latest thing they've done, they've beaten their time on the last 5K run they've done and things as well. But I think we are quite guilty of concentrating on our physical health, but not concentrating as much as we should on our mental well-being and our mental health, and kind of quite often neglecting that. And we often neglect that until something tends to go bang or pop and there's an issue. I know that was certainly the case for me, and sort of how I shone a light upon myself. It wasn't until things got really bad that I actually sort of stepped back and thought, well, what is it I need to do? So again, sort of from the physical health perspective, people go out, they ride a bike, they go to the gym, they go for a walk, and they're much more inclined to focus on that than they are sort of the mental health. And by mental health, I don't just mean sort of things like meditating or practicing mindfulness. It's things like, do we give ourselves enough time and enough rest? Do we give ourselves opportunity to relax? Do we focus on things like our nutritional health and how our diet supports brain function in the right way as well? We're usually sort of quite happy to crack open another bottle of wine at the end of the night, or another beer at the end of the night, but is that always an ideal thing to do to sort of best manage our mental health as well? So why do we have to wait for something to go wrong until we fix it? We all have mental health in the same way as that we have physical health, and I think that we need to be managing it in that same way too. So just things like 10 minutes of meditation 2 or 3 times a week has proven to have the same effect of taking antidepressants. So I think my focus really is kind of, why don't people focus on mental well-being as much as they do their physical well-being? And I think part of that may be because that we don't necessarily understand how to manage our mental health quite as well as we do our physical health. So when we think about this into the workplace and bring it into the workplace, and particularly, we're at Bristol Tech Festival, so particularly into the tech industry, a recent study in 2019 showed that something like 60% of people that are working in our industry have admitted to feeling burnt out at some point. I think it was at some point in the last 3 months. But obviously this burnout isn't good, and it can obviously then go on to lead into a variety of other issues. But when we start thinking about the scale of the problem facing, and this is just the tech sector, and the tech sector kind of sits in the middle. If we go into finance, insurance, the medical sector and stuff, these rates are a lot higher, and we need to start shining a light onto this from a workplace perspective. And when we look at the sort of the facts and the numbers behind it, which I'll go into in a moment, more and more people are reporting that they're having problems with their mental health. It's going up quite dramatically, as you can see from the slide here, where we're talking some percent between 93 and 2019. And that's even before we get into 2020 and the issues that COVID have brought to us as well. So just to put some numbers around this, and just kind of how much people are suffering. So these are some figures from the charity Mind, and they release a number of reports each year. But when we look at the stats, it shows that 1 in 4 people in the UK experience some form of mental health issue at any given point, which, when I think about that, is a staggering number, 25% of the population. And I kind of, when I think about it as a number of friends that I've got, and you know, a quarter of people in a given year are going to be suffering. 1 in 6 of us are going to report that we are likely to have an experience of anxiety or depression in any given week, and 1 in 8 of us are getting treatment for some kind of, somewhere in the region of about £12.2 billion a year, which is a huge figure and a huge sum of money. So what's causing some of this, what I class as hypergrowth with mental health issues? Well, let's go back 100 years and think about what the world looked like then. Almost 20% of all the jobs were in the farming sector, where a cognitive load for a day's work is way less than what we would expect from a modern worker. So think tech sector, I'm thinking about a developer today. You know, ploughing a field is far less demanding mentally than what it would be to be developing a new application and software. Then if we fast forward into the 1950s, the majority of work was still factory based. So some 30% of all jobs were in factories, and whilst the work was often hard work, it was very repetitive, and again it didn't require a huge amount of cognitive load. But also, you know, people had regular breaks. The unions made sure of that, and people finished on time. They headed home, and they spent time with their friends and family, giving them the opportunity to switch off from their day's work and unwind. And then fast forward again to the 1980s. You know, the service sector started to boom, particularly around financial services and associated professional services. However, we didn't still have the level of distractions that we experience in the modern workplace today, and there wasn't the level of mobility that we experience in today. So once you stepped away from your desk, you didn't have the opportunity to take your laptop with you. You just stepped away from your desk, and then that was you switching off. Which brings me then to start looking into where we are in 2020. You know, we have built an extremely complex world, one where we are on 24/7. You know, we've got a number of different digital devices. Sorry, I should put my teeth back in, and that causes us some big problems to have. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my phone, and my laptop allows me to work from different locations, but it also allows me, if I wish, to really sort of fight the urge to log in at any time as well. It doesn't allow me that opportunity to switch off as much as I'd like to. So, you know, I can continue working unsociable hours. So as much as I can go to an office, or I can go to a flexible working office somewhere, I still can't, or I still find it difficult sometimes to switch off, and particularly when we've got these things next to us as well. That also makes it quite difficult. So there's, on this slide, there's just some of the apps that we will use on a daily basis. I've taken sort of a lot of what I use around that, but you know, I think that it just goes to show that you know, we are constantly being distracted. There are a number of things going on around us all of the time. We've got a number of different communication channels, some where people expect faster responses than others. We've got more information at our fingertips than we have ever before, and you know, information perspective, we can see what's going on the other side of the world instantly. There's no delay or lag in that anymore. It is 24/7, 365 at our fingertips whenever we want it. Some design that these tools have made our lives easier, and it's given us the ability to work smarter and faster, and a whole amazing things that we do with the technology that we have. It's just that our brains haven't been able to keep up with the development that we've had in the workplace over the last sort of particularly probably 10 to 15 years. That pace of change, that pace of innovation has increased, which has led to marketplaces being disrupted very, very quickly, sort of almost overnight when we think about it in sort of business terms. And because of that, we're kind of starting to leave our well-being at the door, which isn't good. As I've just mentioned, all these things that we have around us are increasing the levels of pressure that we're feeling. And I've not even begun to sort of mention the level of negative impact that social media has actually had on the world too. So just to give you sort of some indication of what this level of burnout is starting to cost the economies of the world. So in terms of absenteeism, presenteeism, it's costing the UK economy around 45 billion a year, which is about £1,300 per employee of the working population. But at a global level, it's somewhere in the region of $1 trillion. That is just a huge sum of money, and it's something that I think organisations really need to step back and to start thinking about. So if we just take a look at how this is starting to affect the individual, then the first thing to highlight here is that when individuals are stressed and they're taking time off because of stress, around 95% of people actually give a different reason to the business as to why they're actually taking time off. We could dive into psychology of that in another session in the future maybe, but that's a we're talking nearly everybody that has time off from stress gives a different reason because of it. But stress and poor mental well-being can ultimately lead to burnout, and more serious conditions can manifest themselves because of that in different ways. Individuals start to see a decrease in job satisfaction, an increase in chronic stress. They're less likely to trust their employer, which can lead to other issues and kind of a lack of engagement. And then obviously that leads into things like a reduction in productivity as well. So I don't know if you're aware, but it actually takes between 6 and 9 months for a new employee to become productive and actually add to your bottom line. And the average cost of losing an employee and bringing someone new into the business is around £33,000. So even with the increase in flexible working that we've all taken on board in 2020, this does add to additional stress, but there's business impact that is happening because of this as well. However, there doesn't have to always be this way, and there is an alternative way to start thinking about how to support your employees and taking them from surviving to thriving. And this is done through your company's culture and building a culture of well-being. And I think even if you don't have or feel that you have a strong culture of well-being at the moment, you personally can actually become that driving force that sets that up. I was actually listening to a speech from Obama recently, who happened to be talking about how you change one person's mind and their thoughts. And he basically went on to one person's mind and change one person, then you can change that of a team and the attitude and beliefs of a team. And if you can change a team, then you can then change the entire business unit. And if you can change that entire business unit, then you can start to drive culture and a cultural change right the way across your organization. So let's look at sort of why you might want to start your journey and looking into building a healthy, thriving as an organisation. There are a number of benefits around this. You'll begin to see an increase in engagement, which will in turn obviously look at things like boosting productivity. You'll see a decrease in sickness and absence levels, again having a direct impact on the bottom line for the organisation. Your overall employee value proposition is enhanced, with your employees now advocating the organisation as a great place to work, and then being able to retain the very best talent. And finally, it will help you to decrease staff turnover, boosting impact and boosting the bottom line results. As I mentioned, there's a huge cost to employing new people into a business each time we lose somebody as well. So there's also some real tangible benefits for investing in your wellbeing culture. A 2020 Deloitte report, and this is pre-COVID, highlighted that for every pound that's been invested in wellbeing initiatives and activity, the business on average sees a return of investment of around £5. And then there's a report from Oxford Economics which highlighted that you're going to more likely experience 1.5 times revenue growth of 15% or more, and you're about 2.5 times more likely to experience stock growth. So personally, I think the days of experiencing and people thinking about wellbeing initiatives being sort of fluffy and something just HR do and something that HR should concentrate on, I think it's now time for business leaders of all sizes of organisations to be investing more in a wellbeing strategy. And not just because it's the right thing to do to support your employees, but there's also, there's real tangible benefit into doing this as well. So it's important that while there's a focus on building the right culture, being relevant is also very important, and kind of it's probably never been more important either. So new research from Accenture highlights that relevance is the new currency. So customer loyalty, as we all know, is harder to maintain than it ever has been before, with something like 40% of customers saying that they would be happy to switch brands if they didn't feel that they were relevant. So again, sort of when we look at sort of being dynamic and the importance of that, being able to pivot your business model to where you see the most relevance in the marketplace can be the difference between thriving as an organisation and simply no longer existing. And there's a reason 52% of Fortune 500 companies in 2000 are no longer part of that group. Why? Well, they didn't stay relevant enough in the marketplace. And there's an argument, obviously, that there's that sort of big tech pushed them out the door, and more traditional businesses sort of fell down the pecking order. But why is that? There's multiple things to look at behind that. But you can stay relevant as a business if you have the right employees, people that can turn up to work each day, bring their best self to work, bring their best self to the office, having the opportunity to be creative, to fail fast, to learn from their mistakes is good. But this will add a great deal of pressure to the individuals and to the employer. So as employers, we need to be able to support them in as many different ways as possible. It's no longer good enough just to be providing a wage at the end of the month, or that cool pork table that sits in the corner of the office. What's the point for me, I kind of feel that what's the point in having these kind of perks if no one's able to use them? And a friend of mine who spoke about recently working, he worked in startup a little while ago, but he recently told me the story that they ordered a table football for the corner of the room, and each player was made into a 3D, each member of the team was made into a 3D printed player, which I thought, yeah, that's great, that's really cool. But he said it was cool, but it sat there for 2 years with no one ever having the time to play on it, because everyone was so busy working that these things weren't utilised. So I think we can talk about building the right wellbeing cultures, and we can do some of the things that look, but if we're not acting upon them and not allowing the business and our employees and our teams and our individuals that time and that space, then people are going to really start suffering. And I think this is why we need to start thinking about how you rewire your culture for a faster changing world that we live in today. So I think if we think back to that slide around the early 80s, where business was structured very, very differently to how they are today. Back then they were slow moving, hierarchical. It took ages to get a decision to go up and back down the chain again and get things signed off. You know, and things are much faster. There's the structure, the hierarchical structure doesn't exist. Well, it does exist, but it's not as prominent as it used to be. Decisions can be reviewed and made on the spot by teams, and people are empowered to sort of charge forward, fail fast before moving on to the next thing. But this presents sort of a different set of challenges for the business in terms of keeping up and the dynamics that are involved to sustain this as well. So when I talk about culture, it's very much about building a systematic culture, but over a period of time. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day. This stuff takes time to build. So bringing together those sort of various component parts of the business to focus on building resilience within your teams, building a culture of care that sits right across the business as well. Typically, this change needs to start happening from a leadership level. There is always the argument for a top-down, bottom-up approach, but for leaders to see the importance of this and you know to filter that down through the organisation, it's so important. You know, if they're not on to the wellbeing agenda and understanding it across the organisation and championing it within the business, then you know things get difficult and it doesn't happen quite as quickly as you'd like it to. So leading this level of change does come with levels of ambiguity, and it is a huge challenge. The old leadership models have been turned on the heads in recent years, and the skills that were once valued, they sort of don't come into the frame anymore. Gone are the days of when you know, leaders were that kind of fountain of knowledge in the business, and someone with 25 years working in the, they'd sort of worked their way up the ladder, and you know they knew everything about the business, and they had all the questions, you know, but sorry, they had all the answers. They probably had the questions as well, but they definitely had the answers. But in today's world, leaders have to have a different approach. There's a different set of soft skills that are required to lead and manage teams and people. They have to understand that they don't have all the answers anymore, but they're able to quickly group people together to solve the challenges that occur. And kind of, it's about being adaptable and changing your approach as quickly and as fast as. So we've looked at some of the problems and the issues around wellbeing and kind of what's causing them from a workplace perspective. And we've given we spend around a third of our working lives at work or in the office. I hope you can see sort of how important it is to sort of build and create the right cultures of well-being across the business. Really is, and it's sort of, if you don't have one now, then you know, start putting a stake in the ground today or tomorrow. Start building on the future, because we don't know what the future looks like, but I do think that we're able to support our employees in the right way as we move forwards. But we've also touched on things like the pace of life and how our always-on culture is beginning to have a negative impact. Like I mentioned before, I'm not even going into social media because that has a whole different level of impact in terms of people's mental well-being as well. And then we looked at some of the business benefits and the reasons to invest in supporting people with their well-being. But I also wanted to give some practical tips around sort of the and spot the signs of poor mental health in the workplace as well. So we looked at the challenge and how we've got there, what the business benefit is behind this, but also, how do we start to support our teams? So I know, given sort of the current situation, that this is going to be sort of far more difficult, and looking at teams and kind of managing your teams and individuals and people around you is a completely different challenge when we're working remotely to what it was before. And people used to be able to sort of detect and get a sense of, use emotional intelligence to get a sense of where people are in the office. But screens and cameras now, it's very difficult to sort of spot some of those signs. People don't even turn on their camera. But I think there's still a few signs that we can sort of start to pull through to begin to recognise if people are struggling. And I think the other thing to remember is that when we talk about mental health, there's always sort of a time frame involved in this as well. And it could be just a few weeks that people are kind of suffering from poor mental health. There's something in particular that's happening in their life, there's something circumstantial, there's a particular event or something environmentally that's going on that's causing them to suffer. Or they could be suffering for many, many years, and they've learned to deal with it, but then have spikes and peaks and troughs of positive and negative mental health. But if any of your team are displaying some of the signs that I've put up here, then I'd recommend that you reach out with an empathetic hand and see how you can support them. I appreciate we're living in unprecedented times, and we had a look at the stats around mental health, and we can see on TV and kind of reading the news every day that there's the issue, and it has been exacerbated by the pandemic. But I think if you are spotting any of these signs from your teams, then I definitely say sort of just hold your hand out and see if you can support them in the right way. So what can you do to sort of start? What can you do as sort of leaders to support your individuals as well? I think the first thing to highlight here is that just people are uncomfortable talking about their own mental health, and only about 13% of employees feel comfortable actually talking about mental health in the workplace. The stat is a bit higher when you start talking about leadership. It goes up to about 40%, but just that kind of that general conversation, people do feel uncomfortable. So it's a situation that you need to approach very carefully. I think the other thing to mention is that there's no quick fixes, there's no silver bullets. I wish there was, but there isn't. But it's about creating a concerted and continued effort to support the change and hopefully the culture within your organisation as well. But just as a few things, I think it's really important that we communicate, that you open up to your teams and provide a safe space for them to talk openly about their mental health. Bringing it up in team meetings, and also potentially with one-to-ones on an individual basis as well. The more you can open up, and the more supported your teams will feel because of that as well. The other thing is kind of listen, and we don't always stop and listen, and some people's listening be improved. I know mine can definitely be improved. And we should also not sort of jump too quickly into trying to create a solution for them as well. I'm just sort of a bit conscious of time, but I think sort of just offering that hand, offering the olive branch out, will definitely help you to support your teams, sort of now and in the future too. But it's not just about supporting others. It's really important that we look after ourselves as well. And I kind of sort of want to sort of leave you on. There's a couple more slides, but leave you on this slide with just thinking about our own mental health, our own mental well-being, and what we need to do to support ourselves from that perspective as well. So for me, the first and most important one, as Bob Hoskins once said on a BT advert many moons ago, if you're old enough to remember that, it's good to talk, and it really is good to talk. As leaders and managers, we have a lot to contend with on a daily basis, and that can create a lot of tension within us, and that plays out in a variety of ways. It can be aches and pains in our body, through to anxieties and depressions as well. And talking really helps. So whether it's with a friend, a colleague, a loved one, personally, I've just started working with a coach, which I'm finding really beneficial, just to give myself that kind of space and freedom to talk openly and honestly about some of the challenges and things that I'm facing. So just being able to talk about that is really, really important. Make sure you switch off before you go to bed. Give yourself some time to relax, give yourself some time to unwind. That improves your sleep. And we all know about the health benefits about getting a decent night's sleep, and how we feel when we've have had a good night's sleep, and how we feel when we haven't had a good night's sleep as well. I think alongside this as well is around sort of setting the right boundaries, which a lot of us find ourselves doing at the moment. But, you know, like the physical act of closing the laptop and turning the screen off at the end of the day can be really good to say, right, my day's ending. Make sure you keep physically active, you know, going outside, being in nature. We all know the positivity that can bring to us. And in fact, science has proven now that going for a 20-minute walk in nature every day is as effective, if not more effective, than actually taking some antidepressants as well. The old saying, we are what we eat, has never been more true. So think about the nutrition and what you're actually putting into your body. There's a huge evidence and more research is being done all the time around how the neurons we have in our stomach talk directly to those in our brain, and how that affects our mood. Take time for hobbies, obviously, just giving yourself that kind of time and space that you need to relax and to switch off. And one that we don't always think about, gratitude and being thankful for what we do have around us. You know, this is a proven positive psychology approach or technique. You know, so just saying thank you to someone will not only put a smile on their face, but it will release all those good endorphins into your body and into your mind as well. So I'm just going to leave you with sort of a thought or a question to ask yourselves, which is, what can you do today, tomorrow, and this week and beyond that will impact your own well-being and the well-being in your company culture?